Good morning. Welcome to the CEO Conversation. Today we have the honor of welcoming Steve Robinson with us. Steve is or was the Chief Marketing Officer for Chick-fil-A for over 35 years and now runs his own consulting practice where he talks about marketing and branding and really how the power of your message as it relates to your business. So Steve, thank you for being here today. We're so delighted and honored that you would join us.
Thank you, Ken. It's a pleasure.
Well, I've loved your, as I was mentioning before, I love your book that you've written, that you've told a little bit of the inside story of Chick-fil-A and the stories that you tell and about culture and about decision making and marketing and branding are just outstanding. So thank you for writing the book.
Well, thank you.
One of the questions and one of the stories that you relate in the book is when Chick-fil-A was going through a very difficult time and you guys were called back to your purpose. Can you tell that story a little bit and how that really re-energized the organization?
Okay. Pardon me. I assume you're referencing the social media blow up in 2012?
Right.
Yes. Yes. Well, True Cathy, who was the founder and I hired me and had the pleasure of working with for over 30 years, I had always had a very clear policy that he did not want to involve the business in social, political, or even religious expression platforms. And in the summer of 2012, I think a little unknowingly and certainly unintentional, Dan Cathy did an interview on a Christian radio station, and he mentioned his personal feelings about traditional marriage versus same-sex marriage. And obviously, no interview is exempt from going viral in our social media age, and it went viral quickly. And suddenly we had a social firestorm. And the left, the LGBT movement grabbed it and made a big deal about it. And I think it caught Dan a little off guard, but I'll summarize the story. It took us several days to grope with where we were and the magnitude of it. We did some very quick research in the field to discover the kind of the impact of what it had done to the brand and who was buying it and who wasn't, I guess you'd say. And it was a large enough issue, significant enough issue, that my encouragement to Dan was we need to be forthright and we just need to say, look, here's our legacy. Don't be surprised. I don't think you should be surprised that part of the ownership family would make a statement like this. After all, we are closed on Sunday. But here's our heritage, and our heritage is rooted in honor, dignity, and respect, and giving genuine service and hospitality to everybody. And that's not going to change. It's at the core of who Chick-fil-A is, and we're refocusing on that. That statement, and I've paraphrased it, that position came after really all of us close to the issue going back to the corporate purpose of Chick-fil-A to honor God by being a faithful steward of all is entrusted to us and to have a positive influence on all who come in contact with Chick-fil-A. And so the paramount question that was embedded in going back to our purpose for Dan and the rest of us to wrestle with was, okay, do we still want to have an opportunity to have a positive influence on all who come in contact with Chick-fil-A, or are we going to redefine the scope of our audience and the field of audience that we want to serve and have an impact on? Obviously, we chose no. We want to be true to our purpose, which we had wrestled with and written back in 1982, also in the midst of a crisis, which I talk about in the book. Mm-hmm. And it, as you said, it forced us to refocus on the purpose and recalibrate the entire organization. No, we're not changing. This is who we are. This is who we want to be. At the core of Chick-fil-A, we're a business about genuine hospitality that hopefully glorifies God and serves and positively influences everyone we touch. So I think the lesson that we relearned. Ironically, we wrote the purpose in the midst of a crisis, and we relearned it again in the midst of another one. Was if you have a viable purpose, and you still believe in it, then it needs to be a regularly visited anchor when you're making critical decisions, when you're doing planning, and when you're dealing with crises. What's really important? Why do we exist? And if it's still relevant, then let's go back to that, and let's re-anchor the organization in the purpose that we still believe in. So I think the upshot is, if an organization doesn't have a clear reason why we exist, you're a little disadvantaged. In fact, I probably should say you may be greatly disadvantaged when you enter times of crisis. That's what happened in 1982. We certainly knew what was important to Truett Cathy, but we never had a clear purpose that was in words on paper. And it was the economic crisis of '82, when money was costing 18 and 19%. Mall development was crashing, retail sales was crashing, our cash flow was crashing. And we didn't have a corporate purpose to help clarify for the organization, okay, how are we going to look at this? How are we going to work through this? What are we going to hang on to as we deal with this crisis? And that's what resulted in writing the original corporate purpose.
Yeah.
That help?
Oh, that's fantastic. I think that purpose piece, and one of the key aspects that you talk about in the book, I think really reminds leaders of having that purpose, and then marketing and talking around it. You mentioned the 1982 situation where you guys were really in the midst of another crisis. You had the executive team, or you all went away and had a couple day conversation. Can you just give a little bit more detail? Because I thought that was an interesting story in the book too, because the company had been existing for a little while.
Yes.
And then you guys had to come back, but you had to refine that purpose of kind of how Truett started and what it was about. Can you talk a little bit about how you guys found that purpose again, or rediscovered it to write that?
Well, Truett Cathy created this Chick-fil-A sandwich in his little dwarf house diner in South Atlanta. He opened the diner in '46. He didn't create the sandwich until the mid-'60s. And he didn't brand it and open the first Chick-fil-A restaurant until 1967. So when I joined him in 1981, he'd only been in the Chick-fil-A restaurant business 14 years, but he had already spent over 20 years prior to that being a restaurateur. But I was working for the founder, and he, in the early '80s, the business was getting large enough that they needed some key leaders in key areas of the business to bring skill sets to the table they simply didn't have. And I was one of those guys, but it involved a CFO and a real estate guy and legal counsel and a design and construction guy. And so that's the group that's around him in 1982, when the money market just explodes, price of money explodes, mall development stops. Literally stops. Retail sales takes over a 30% sales crash. Some of those sound familiar today. And we're suddenly facing the first sales decline Chick-fil-A had ever faced. And so that's the context. And he comes to this young executive committee group, and he said, gentlemen, I've just signed my own name and my personal assets to a loan to build our first office building, and we got a cash flow problem. I want to know what you're going to do about it. And we kind of looked at each other and said, no, wait a second. How much of this problem did we create? Not any of it. Again, very similar to what we're dealing with today. And he said, I need you guys to put your heads together. And by the way, wherever you do it, I'm going with you. And we got to figure out how to do something to preserve cash flow and figure out what's going to go on here. So anyway, we go to Lake Lanier Hotel up there, north of Atlanta. We set aside 3 days, and the first the better part of the first day, we tackled the plan for 1983, what you would think we would do. How can we cut expenses? We cut back store growth to almost nil. We froze hiring. We cut, we froze salary increases, the things you would expect. And we reviewed all the plans about, okay, what are we going to do? What are some things that actually we need to eliminate from the plans to preserve cash? Within 2/3 of a day, by mid-afternoon, we feel good about what we've done, and we're sitting there looking at each other. And Dan Cathy asked a question that I thought was relevant, very relevant. He said, now look, we got a lot of new operators. They'd added almost 100 restaurant operators in the previous 2 years. We got a lot of staff that's come on fairly quickly here. Are we sure they really understand what's important in this business? So what he was really saying, do they really understand what's important to Truett, my father, who founded this thing, and who's been running the business and filtering decisions through his value set? And the answer was, well, no, I think all of us understand it, but probably the organization aren't clear about what's really important to Truett and how he would look at a crisis like this. So the backdrop is we spent the next day and a half talking about, okay, Truett, what's really, as you look at this crisis and the situation we're in, what's really important to you? So I'll summarize. What he basically told us was he saw the Chick-fil-A sandwich and the business as a gift, right in line with the gift of salvation he had enjoyed through Christ. And so he didn't see the business as his business. He saw it as a business that God had gifted him, and it was his responsibility, and therefore our responsibility, to properly steward it. If we stewarded it well, maybe God would be gracious and the business would continue. If he chose that it would not continue, he was okay with that. And that kind of surprised some of us. And he looked at us and he said, you need to remember, this is not my first crisis. I've been around this rodeo before. I mean, he served in World War II. He opened a diner just to make a living. He had a second restaurant that burned to the ground. He had another restaurant attempt that wasn't successful, and he sold it. He had 2 medical emergencies that he wasn't sure he was going to live through. He said, so this is, I'm not afraid of crises. God has preserved me through and led me through previous crises. Mm-hmm. And I'm confident he can help us do it again. So based upon what he sat there and shared with us, we said, okay, let's put what's important to Truett, what he's told us, let's put words to it. And we spent the better part of a day and a half putting words and phrases all over on sheets of paper, all over the walls in that little hotel room. And the net that came out of it was the corporate purpose to glorify God by being a faithful steward of all that's entrusted to us, to have a positive influence on all who come in contact with Chick-fil-A. And it's basically got 3 big ideas in it. He wanted a business that would glorify God. Ultimately, he wanted a business that would serve and influence other people in a positive way. But he was very, very clear to us, I don't expect those 2 things to happen. I wouldn't expect God to allow us to do those 2 things if we're not great stewards of what he's put in our care. The business, the people, the resources of the business. And I would hope that everyone in the organization would understand, therefore, their responsibility is to help me steward the gift of Chick-fil-A and everything associated with it. We wrote it up. We spent 2 weeks and we didn't say anything. We prayed about it. We came back together and we packaged that along with a presentation of the revised business plan to the staff and the operators about 2 or 3 weeks later. And Ken, I have to tell you that there was a lot of anxiety, probably like there's a lot of anxiety in the marketplace today. But when we unpacked that, it was like kind of a cloud lifted in the business.
Wow.
People bought in. People were encouraged by it. I think even refreshed by it. We didn't have any misalignment with leadership around it, which was encouraging because it meant it told us that Chick-fil-A, Truett and Jimmy Collins, the CEO, had done a great job of vetting and recruiting and discerning who to invite into the business. And the short of it, we ran the plans, people put their shoulder to it. The next year we had a 36% sales increase. Now the malls were still sucking air, but the operators got out, took the resources we had put into the 83 plan, went out and built the business, turned it around. We built that office building, and as you would say, the rest of the story is history. But even in this crisis we're going through right now, I've talked to some of the folks and some of the leaders I used to work with. They have repeatedly, in person, in meetings and video conferences, taken the organization back to that purpose. Mm-hmm. We're a $10 billion business today. We're not the business, $100 million business that it was when the purpose was written. But at its core, at its foundation, we are still all about this. Mm. And it has helped them calibrate. It's interesting that the Lord's given them an opportunity to calibrate and educate an entirely new generation of staff and leaders on what's really important in Chick-fil-A.
So how would you encourage business owners, if they haven't wrestled with that purpose, would you encourage them to get their leadership team?
Absolutely. Get and dedicate quality time. And by the way, pray up before you go in. But the fundamental question is very simple. You're there to figure out, why do we exist as a business, as an institution? And it's the part B is, do I feel alignment? Why do I exist? Do I feel alignment with whatever the purpose it is that we identify? Because a clear corporate purpose, a clear or institutional purpose, helps people figure out their own personal alignment with why they come to work every day.
Wow, that's good.
And absolutely, you get in a room, give yourself plenty of time. You don't leave it, if you don't use it all, adjourn and go play golf. But that's the fundamental work assignment. Why do we exist? And what is there in our history from founders, from previous leaders, from major influencers that have been in this organization? How have we, when we've had crucial decisions to make, what have been those crucial values that we drew on, that we leaned on when we were making those decisions? And get those words up on the board and write it down. And it should not be long. If it's more than one sentence, it's too long.
Wow.
People need to be able to remember it and embrace it, and quite frankly, tell others and help others understand it.
Right. Now, real quick on this, because I'm just curious. So, I mean, obviously that's a bold purpose about honoring God and glorifying God. Obviously, all your Chick-fil-A operators aren't necessarily Christian.
They're not. That's correct.
How do they align with that purpose, or have you seen? Does it just come back to stewardship for them?
I think for most, you're right. Many of them, not all of them, many of them are not believers. I think for most of them, there's alignment not just in stewardship, but in positive influence. Where their faith walk is, obviously, is personal. It certainly is not a criteria for operator selection, not to mention the fact that would be illegal. Mm-hmm. But the advantage of it, Ken, is if they find, I'm going back to what I just mentioned a minute ago, if they have personal alignment with the Chick-fil-A purpose, then we know that they're going to lead that business, and they're going to attract talent to that business that reflects that purpose. And they're going to execute guest experiences that reflect that purpose.
Right.
You know, what their personal motivation is around the issue of faith is theirs. It's up to them. But certainly the other two parts are very relevant. Positive influence and being a great steward. And they know that if they're not a great steward of the brand, operationally, community service, their relationship is at risk. I mean, This is not fun and games. This is a serious business, highly committed to the brand standards, and their stewardship is pivotal to being part of the Chick-fil-A family.
I really wanted to unpack a little bit more of that stewardship model because obviously, you know, when I wrote my book, Well Done, one of the principles I'm encouraging business owners and those that they lead to move from ownership to overseer, which is basically thinking of themselves as a steward.
Right.
So can you tell a
Right.
little bit, you guys at Chick-fil-A have done an outstanding job of that. How have you communicated that, and how do you see the operators embrace that idea of stewardship in their local
Well, Ken, I think part of it is messaging and communication, but quite frankly, I think the biggest reason it's worked at Chick-fil-A is because of the operator deal. I mean, literally the legal operating deal, which I discuss in the book. I think the deal that Truett and Jimmy Collins crafted back in the mid 60s, I describe it in my book as ingenious because it's never changed, and it's incredibly generous, and therefore it's very few people want to copy it because many perceive it's too generous.
Right.
For those who are online who've never heard how the deal works, a Chick-fil-A operator is an independent contractor. Many of them have their own LLC. They do not own the assets. Chick-fil-A finds the store sites, they build the restaurants, they equip the restaurants. Chick-fil-A has complete control over operator selection. If they select you as an independent contractor to run one of their restaurants, you've got to operate it in the context of all the brand standards of Chick-fil-A. You pay them a brand percentage royalty off the top that not only pays for the rights of the brand, but all the brand services, marketing, accounting, operations, IT support, supply chain systems, etc. After all of your expenses, which includes staff, because the employees in these restaurants are not Chick-fil-A Inc. employees, they are the employees of the independent operator. After all your expenses, you then split the net operating profit with Chick-fil-A 50-50. Half goes to Chick-fil-A, and they categorize it as additional operator draw or operator expense, which basically is put against the expense of the capital assets. The other half is your income as an operator. Truett and Jimmy created that deal back in 1967, 68. Because when he opened his first two mall Chick-fil-A restaurants, he had managers and they were calling him with questions and problems, and Truett didn't want people calling him with questions and problems. And he told Jimmy, he said, "This is what I'm going to create. I don't want this." Truett was not motivated by growth or being wealthy. He really wasn't. And he told Jimmy, "Forget it." But Jimmy had this sense, wait a second, I think you got something really good here. Let's rethink this. I don't know the dynamics of how they created the operator agreement that I just described, but they converted those first two managers to that agreement, and the deal has not changed since. When I joined Chick-fil-A, the average Chick-fil-A operator was probably making around $40,000 a year running a mall restaurant. This past year, the average Chick-fil-A operator was almost $500,000 in income, their income. Deal hasn't changed. Now, all that to say, because every customer is their customer too, the team members are their team members, relationships in the community are their relationships. The organizational model is operator centric, not headquarter centric. It's unpacking in the book. It's a pyramid, and it's built on operator first. As a result of that, the operators have complete control over the kind of decisions they make in the local market and in the restaurant, as long as they maintain the standards of the brand. And so they're highly motivated to grow the business, give guests great experiences, keep team members longer, which lowers training development. And the deal naturally motivates stewardship. So that's a long answer to your question.
I love it.
That's how they structured the deal, and as a result, it helps stewardship. And so every major opportunity at Chick-fil-A is designed to be operator-led. Operator-led. And sidebar, I think it's ironic. I think it's, in fact, personally genius that what our president and vice president decided yesterday to push the strategy for reactivating America down to the people on the ground mirrors what Truett did with Chick-fil-A.
Mm. Well,
so that's how they do it. That's why it works.
Well, and I want to get a little bit of your story too with Truett. I talked to Jimmy a few different times, who I think highly of, and I asked Jimmy a few different questions around business, and Jimmy's so sweet. What he says is, Jimmy said, well, Truett always told me just go with your gut, right? So whatever he said, there is no right model. It's really just kind of what. And you talk about even when he hired you as the chief marketing officer, he basically told you, I just don't want to do it, right?
That's correct. He did. That's right.
You go do that. How do you see that level of, trusting yourself, trusting your people? How did you receive? I mean, you stayed there for 35 years.
Yes.
He gave you a lot of control to go do it, sometimes positive, negative, maybe. But how did you, just from an employee standpoint, was that something that really motivated you and really?
Oh, absolutely. So let me go back to the story that you just alluded to. My last interview with Truett. Now I'm director of marketing at Six Flags over Georgia at the time. I have a job that I happen to love. And they'd approached me about starting the marketing department at Chick-fil-A in the summer of 1980. And now it's December and I'm still interviewing. Almost 5 months. I'm sitting in his office. This is all going on stealth. And well into the conversation, I asked Truett the question that got the response you just referenced. I said, Truett, what are you looking for in the ideal marketing candidate? And am I the guy? And his response was, I have no idea. Whatever it is, I just don't want to do it. But what I do know is if you come here, it's my expectation that you're never going to leave. So we're going to make sure that you and I and everybody here can have fun together and that we can trust each other. And because I don't want to deal with what we're asking you to do. I want you to do it. But I want to have fun working with you, and I want to trust your integrity and your discernment. So I found that answer at the time incredibly odd, given the normal paradigms in the marketplace. But Ken, the answer to your question is he lived it out. I discovered in a matter of not just years, months. I talk about in the book. In 1982, I made a judgment error on a campaign, and it blew up and cost $2 million more than it should have cost. And I walked into Jimmy to apologize, and Jimmy had obviously embraced what Truett felt. He said, don't worry about it. We just invested $2 million in your education. You'll never make that mistake again. And that's an incredibly empowering feeling. When people trust you enough to give you room to make mistakes. And so how do you create a culture like that? I think you create a culture like that going all the way back to the hiring, the vetting, hiring, selection process. Truett nailed it. The second thing he said to me in that interview was, we don't train culture here, we hire it. So if you're really clear about what kind of people you're looking for, and I'm not talking about demographics or any of those kind of issues. I'm talking about judgment, character, their skill set relationally with people. Can they develop fellowship, not through position power, but through their own personal giftedness. If you really are patient and do your vetting on people, then the whole ability to empower them and trust them and give them room ratchets way up. And so even though I had a big blow up, I had a big mistake in one of those early campaigns. It really released me personally to feel the freedom to innovate, to push the envelope with innovation in the business. I talk about in the book all the different innovations we led, even in the 80s, but long before Chick-fil-A was even on the street. I don't think any of that would have happened if I didn't know that these two guys, Truett Cathy and Jimmy Collins, trusted me and had my back.
Mm.
And there were points when the innovation I was recommending for the business, rubbed people in the organization the wrong way. Well, why do we want to change that? Or why do we want to do that? How do we know that's going to make money? And of course, I'm trying to push the organization towards beyond the transaction perspective to a brand value perspective. And my position was it may not make money today, but it's going to build the brand. It's going to make more money later.
Mm.
And I had to be able to prove that using research and store testing, et cetera. And we were able to do that. But the point is, they had created an environment where myself and then ultimately my team felt the room to innovate. Today, when I left Chick-fil-A, people would ask me, what does the marketing department do at Chick-fil-A? And my answer was simple: we innovate.
Mm. I love
We're not a traditional marketing department. This group is focused on bringing the voice of the customer into every brand touch point people have with Chick-fil-A. The restaurant, the menu, the service experience, the IT interface, everything.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, the voice of the customer became the foundation first step in all innovation at Chick-fil-A. We started that model in the 80s. And when I left in 2016, we'd even evolved to the point that we had almost 100,000 square feet of flexible innovation space for restaurant design, for service modeling, for IT development, for menu work. They now have over 150,000 square feet of innovation space, mm-hmm. where they can cross-functionally do innovation, bring customers in, bring operators in, shorten cycle time. But Chick-fil-A has become an innovation business. Mm-hmm. And I think when people look at Chick-fil-A, how do they do that? How do they do that? How do they do drive-through so well, so fast, so accurately? How are their people so properly trained? And it's hard work, but it's rooted in a culture. Going back to your question, it's rooted in a culture where people feel the freedom to make mistakes and innovate and try things and work on the light bulb and miss it a few hundred times before it finally works.
Right.
And but it's all rooted in that conversation I had with the founder. That's where it starts. Mm. It starts with leadership, creating environment, and you can only create that kind of environment if you attract the right talent to the business.
Wow. I want to get into the innovation conversation because you were a major innovator, as you were just mentioning, both in your marketing campaigns and really all throughout the restaurant, whether it was from the design of the menus to the big boards in the malls. But I do want to, I'm curious because I know in that $2 million mistake that you made or that you referenced, you said, hey, Jimmy was gracious and said, hey, we've just trained you. What I've heard is that Truett didn't even say anything to you about that, right?
In fact, I asked Jimmy, I said, Jimmy, do I need to go to Truett and apologize? He said, no, I wouldn't go up there right now. But here's the other side of that mistake, Ken, and I talk about it in the book. It ultimately impacted a complete paradigm shift in how we looked at marketing Chick-fil-A. The entire industry focuses on creating transactions primarily around product, price, deals. And that whole mistake was rooted in couponing. Mm-hmm. A coupon promotion just blew up. And it drove me and the few people I had on my team at that time to step back and say, wait a second, why are we doing things the way everybody else does? Mm-hmm. Our product's worth full price. Let's figure out how to market Chick-fil-A without couponing, without discounting, without deals, And that's why you don't see any of that stuff from Chick-fil-A. But that started with the hard experience back in the early 80s. And it took years to wean operators off of doing deals.
Mm.
But it migrated to a marketing strategy that focused on being generous, giving away food in all kinds of ways. It focused on a model that moved to let's leverage our people instead of just trying to drive transactions, and let's equip our talent at the front line to give a different kind of experience. And second mile service came out of that focus. Mm-hmm. And it even impacted marketing. Say we don't even want our marketing communications and our advertising to look like traditional fast food. Mm-hmm. Let's do something others don't do. Let's actually make people smile. Be unexpectedly fun. We don't have a lot of money to spend, so when they do see something from Chick-fil-A, let's make sure they remember it. And that was the root motivation that led to the cow campaign. But we'd already identified we want this brand to be unexpectedly fun, in the spirit of being the unfast food, and that's what led to hiring the Richards Group and the cow campaign. So
you took some risk when you did that. That was
oh yeah. Well, we took risks, and quite frankly, the majority of the operators thought we were crazy because we weren't doing what everybody else does.
Right.
But our position was, look, we're gonna use advertising to create an umbrella brand image persona for you. We're not going to try to drive sales out of the home office. You want sales? You go build it. But don't use discounting and couponing to do it. Figure out how you can be generous with your food, sample it, take it to people, give it away for community service, give it away in points of crisis. Of course, they still do all that stuff now.
Right.
That mistake not only told me a lot about the culture, but it actually drove one of the major paradigm shifts for not just our business, but I think, and quite frankly, it's still the only brand that has adopted a marketing paradigm that's almost a 180 from what everybody else does.
Right.
Virtual. All the other brands are just focused on driving transactions. They're not focused on building the brand or building relationships with customers. It's 99-cent this and $1.99 that. That's not Chick-fil-A.
Right. Hey, I wanted to ask, I got a couple questions that I'll open it up for the team to ask some questions as well. So when you took those innovative risks, and which you outlined several in the book, and the cow campaign is one of those, I'm curious, did you just know that did it feel like this was the right campaign, or was there some worry, especially as you got some of the kickback from the operators?
Well, I'll tell you, the first time we were about a year into our relationship with the Richards Group, and we were only doing 3D billboards because that's all we could afford. And the first time I saw that piece of creative with 2 cows, I burst out laughing. And so did the other 2 guys I worked with. I mean, there was only 3 of us that were leading the advertising at that point. So I think intuitively, yes, we knew. But we thought, okay, we can do focus groups to do a little pretest on this, or we can just put this puppy up. We can just put these 2 guys up and see what happens. So a lot of groups would use expensive focus groups, they'd show people different creative concepts and get react. In this particular case, we did not. We put the board up in Atlanta in the summer of 1996, and the buzz in the community exploded. We're getting phone calls, operators are talking about it, customers talking to their operators. 2 cows were stolen off a billboard in Chattanooga that made the wire service. Radio stations are doing their shows from the up there with the cows. It was bizarre. And so quickly we knew we had a good idea. We said, okay, we're willing to take a risk with this. Jimmy was willing to back me up, and we put 1 billboard up in our top 20 markets. Same thing happened. Then we did focus groups in several of our markets to find out And we did phone research, quantitative research. What do you remember about Chick-fil-A advertising? What do you like about it? What don't you like about it? And what we learned in both the qualitative and the quantitative, was that they didn't remember any of the advertising we'd done before. 85 to 90% of what they remembered was either eat more chicken or 2 cows. Amazing.
Right.
And we went back to the agency and said, look, we now know that our intuition, this is bigger than our intuition. This is an idea that resonates with the majority of people who've seen it. They love it. Take 3 months and go work on it and create a campaign. So the answer to your question is yes, we weren't afraid to trust our intuition to test it. But once it became clear that it was a big idea, then we used research to figure out, okay, is this just a single billboard idea, or has this got the roots to be a campaign? And the research said it can be the latter. And that's when we gave agency the green light.
So did you feel like you had to bring people along on that decision, or
No,
or other innovative
no,
decisions? No.
no. Truett loved it. Jimmy loved it. Nobody gave away more plush cow toys than Truett Cathy. He carried a bag full of plush toys everywhere he went. No, once we saw the buzz in the marketplace, and once I showed them the research in those 20 markets where we tested it, not an issue. And the challenge then for the agency was to keep the campaign fresh and funny and relevant year after year, quarter after quarter. And I worked with them for 22 years, and they did it.
That's fantastic. Wow.
Yeah.
Hey, real quick, I am going to open this up to other conversation, but when you talk about marketing and branding, and again, I love the book that you have. I do highly recommend it to CEOs. What do you think that companies should be focused on where it comes to marketing and branding? Is it the differentiator factor? Is there some message, or what do you see as some of the biggest mistakes that in general?
Well, I think one of the biggest mistakes I see, Ken, is that people see branding as part of marketing, like they're one and the same, or or branding is a subset of marketing. The perspective that I unpack in the book, what I learned is everything that touches the customer is brand. Anything, messaging, marketing, people, any experience, food product, everything is brand. Now that took years at Chick-fil-A to people to get their head around it. Quite frankly, not everybody in operations or finance thought that way. Right. But what do you mean? We're producing products. We're selling food. No, you're not. You're creating a brand image, a brand perspective in people's minds, and how we execute food and how we execute service and how we execute marketing all contributes to the brand or can hurt the brand. So the upshot of that is that marketing is subjected to the brand. Marketing serves the brand, not the other way around. Marketing is simply part of the toolkit that helps build the brand, just as product should, store design should, people strategy should, service strategy should. And I think that is the big trip up for many organizations, is they think that somehow brand and marketing are these sidebar things. I would say marketing can be a sidebar thing for a while, but brand is everything. It is the entire expression of the business. And most organizations don't look at that. So for example, in my planning template that evolved over time at Chick-fil-A, not too far from corporate purpose was defining brand essence, what we call brand essence, which was to put a question to it. What do we want to be in the marketplace? Some people would call it positioning. How do we want to be thought of in the marketplace? When I left, the brand essence which came out of research and talking to thousands of customers, the brand essence was 4 words: where good meets gracious.
Yeah, I love it.
It wasn't even food. It wasn't food focused. It was bigger than that. But we didn't create it. It came as a result of listening to customers, heavy users, light users. Chick-fil-A is where good meets gracious. So the brand essence then needs to influence all and needs to inform all of your innovation and your operating strategy so that everything you do reinforces where good meets gracious. Now, today that brand essence, they've evolved since I've left to a different statement, to be the most caring company people encounter. I would argue it's very similar to where good meets gracious, but that's the premise that's the brand essence. Doesn't say anything about food, does it?
Right.
And I think given today's environment, literally today's environment, is help those people in the restaurants really focus, okay, what's really important here? We're going to lose some sales. What's really important is how we care for the people in our community. And they're living it out there. Mm-hmm. So that's a long answer to your question, but brand is everything. Marketing serves brand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that statement that you had, and I think the caring statement, obviously, but where good meets gracious it's so profound, but yet it's simple enough to remember and apply, which I think is really
I still kind of like it. I suspect if I was there, we'd still be using it, but that doesn't matter. I'm not there.
But you talked about good people, good food. I mean, there's a lot of good component, right?
Good food, good people, good environment, good service, good ingredients, etc. Yep. That's what people that's what people expected from Chick-fil-A, right?
But you got that. You really believe the voice of the customer, talking to the customer, trying to get as many customers.
There's no question. There's no question. Absolutely.
So you would say the purpose comes from the founder, the vision of why you exist, but the brand essence really comes from the voice of the customer.
That is correct. That's correct, Ken.
Yeah,
that's correct.
I love that dynamic, and I think businesses miss it sometimes because they
founder / leaders set purpose. Brand essence is listen to the customer, and what you're trying to do is to find a brand essence that no one else can replicate. You create a space where there's a lot of brands around you, but you're actually all by yourself. Mm-hmm. And I think to a large degree, Chick-fil-A was able to do that, are still able to do that. It's an enviable position for a brand. Not many companies achieve it.
Steve, you've been fantastic. Hey, we've got about 10 minutes. If we could get him a couple quick questions. If you have a question, I'll take you off of mute, or you can put it in the chat box and I'll ask him your question, or I've got a couple more questions that I can ask him as well. But who has a question for Steve as it relates to marketing, branding, Chick-fil-A? There's lots of things that we didn't obviously talk about in our short time. Steve, obviously you've written the book. I've put a copy to the link on Amazon, but we can also pick it up at your website. You do consulting and speaking now. Do you want to just real quick?
Well, I was until the pandemic hit. Yeah. Yeah, I was. I'm very fortunate. I don't have to work, praise God, but I love work and I love sharing what I feel like I'm kind of reflecting back on short. I love stewarding what the Lord gifted to me, the experiences He gifted to me. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I do consulting, but it's limited, and I do speaking, and I cherry pick those opportunities, but not a lot. I don't want to work full time. I don't want to work that hard.
Hey, what are some of the messages that you communicate in your speaking? I mean, obviously, you communicate some great things in the book, but is there a lesson or two that you try to have people to take away?
Well, I think the paramount lesson, the foundational lessons, which we've already talked about some, is that leaders have to craft or create the culture, and then they have to steward it. They have to work the soil. And my experience is many leaders don't spend adequate time defining the key components of the culture, which is principally purpose and the key values by which you make decisions. And then they don't spend enough time really staying engaged with the organization to make sure that everyone's living out that culture and using that culture to filter their decision making. I think the number one priority for leadership is culture management. It's not strategy. That's second. So that's a theme. I think the second theme is this whole issue is, if you're a customer interfacing company, do you want to be a great brand, or do you want to be a transactional organization? That's a big, big decision. You can be a transaction organization. There's a lot of them out there to do quite well. But if you're in a space where you think you can add value and differentiate yourself, and in fact, in the process, improve your margins by being a great brand, that drives an entirely different business model. I think a third thing that I get a lot of questions about because of Chick-fil-A's history is crisis management. I talk a lot about that, and I've helped people put together some crisis management plans. And then finally is the whole process, the whole role of how do you attract great talent, keep them, develop them, and how that ultimately feeds back to your culture. Those are probably the four big buckets I spend most of my time on.
Yeah, but all those are really critical and essential in the marketplace. Hey, a question that I got that some people wanted me to ask you was about your faith and about the faith of the kind of Chick-fil-A as an organization. I know your faith is important, and you mentioned earlier about prayer as you were going into these times of decision making or finding your purpose.
Yes.
How do you think faith has shaped you as a leader, and
oh my God,
and then even as an organization, and has it been a critical component of you?
Absolutely. Well, I share in the book fairly early in the book, Ken, you may remember that one of the most important decisions I ever made, I didn't realize I was about to make it, but I was in junior college, and I went to a conference that featured an evangelist up in the New York area that was working with gangs. He'd written a book called Crossing the Switchblade. And I heard him speak, and it was the first time I really understood that my relationship with God wasn't about my performance, my ability to build a bridge to him, but was about the work that he'd already completed through his son Christ to give me access to, literally, to a relationship with him. And it's the first time I really understood what grace was in a profound way and in a personal way. And I accepted Christ as a sophomore in college. Didn't grow much, but then I married an incredible woman, Diane, who I met at Auburn. She had a stronger faith background than I did. We got involved in some great churches. And I've had 2 or 3 really impactful milestone experiences spiritually. One of them was shortly before I joined Chick-fil-A, where I was asked to lead a fundraising program at our church to build a new educational building. And the notes, I don't think the pastor knew, but tithing was not my passion. It wasn't my strength. Quite frankly, I had tight hands. Diane was a giver, I wasn't. And through that experience, I discovered a verse, through my pastor's leadership, I discovered a verse in Malachi 3, verses 8 through 12, where he tells the Jewish nation, listen, I got a gripe with you guys. You're robbing me, and you're robbing me of tithes and offerings. Now, the context of it wasn't about the gifts, the money. The context of, you're robbing me of the worship I deserve through giving. But then he told them, I got a promise for you. If you will trust me in this area of tithing and offerings, I'll bless you beyond your wildest imagination. I'm paraphrasing, so go look it up if you want to read it. That verse, I discovered, is the only place in Scripture where God said, trust me, and the outcome is a positive promise rather than a bad promise, a negative promise. That verse changed my life because giving was quite frankly, it was a spiritual stronghold. And literally in a matter of days, Diane and I changed our commitment, our pledge commitment to that campaign that we were involved in. We didn't know how we were going to meet it. And a matter of, and not making this up, a matter of days after turning that pledge in is when I got the first phone call from Jimmy Collins saying, would you like to be considered to start a marketing department at Chick-fil-A? Wow. Now, I'm not suggesting that's how God's got to operate in everybody's life. But what I learned from that, besides the lesson about giving and having loose hands, I learned the bigger lesson that God owns everything. He's a steward of everything. So I walk into a crisis meeting in 1983 with Truett, and he starts talking about being a steward and God owns everything and everything is a gift. I don't have any misalignment with him because I've had a significant spiritual experience around money that aligns with everything this 61-year-old is telling me. So that's just one example. I've seen, we've had an incredibly blessed marriage, family. I've seen God repeatedly answer prayer in our lives, open doors in our life. My entire career is unexpected gift, and one open door after another. So when people ask me, how do you look at the cow campaign? I look at the cow campaign as a gift. I mean, unbelievable. I mean, there have been, I can't think how many CMOs in America would love to have an iconic campaign. And I had the privilege of being able to be part of managing one. So all that to say, I cannot separate my spiritual life from my professional life or my family life. I don't see life siloed like that. I'm positive Truett didn't. He was a tremendous role model for me. And so the way it manifested, going to the other part of your question, the way it manifested itself in the business is our executive team, we weren't selected based upon whether we were Christians or not, but we weren't, as it turned out, we were. And we were regular praying together, routinely did devotions together. Any critical decision we prayed about, prayed for our families when we had issues and crises in our families. So suddenly now I have around me, besides a peer of working partners, I have a support group. And I had the privilege of working with having that support group for 35 years. And I've treated my leadership team the same way. We learned to know each other intimately. We prayed for each other, and we prayed about our kids and our family situations. And we prayed about major decisions in the marketing department. And we prayed about people we were going to potentially invite into the marketing department. So I don't think God created us to walk this whole separation of church and state. It ain't biblical. I'm sorry. It's just not. We were created as whole beings, physical, emotional, and spiritual. And I saw a man in Truett who unapologetically lived that out in the business. So he made it easy for me and others to do the same thing.
Yeah. And you talk a lot about second mile service and,
the
whole.
That's a biblical principle. It came right out of Matthew 5:41.
Right.
Now, do we plaster that Bible verse all through the business? This is why we do second mile service? No, we don't do that. But internally, it reinforced for the entire organization. This is why second mile service is worth doing, and don't expect to see an immediate return on it. I mean, I don't think the Samaritan was able to probably pay back. I mean, I don't think the Good Samaritan was probably expecting any sort of return from the man he helped.
Right.
And so second mile service in its fundamental principle is to literally go the extra mile, not expecting anything in return. And that, when you're running a business, what's that all about? And it took operators a while to get their head around it. I'll be quite frank about it. But it changed the brand, it changed the business, and I think it actually accelerated growth. It created more brand ambassadors out in the marketplace than we could have ever built staff to do.
Right. Well, you talk about too, real quick, as we finish this up. You talk about it took 7 years for really to implement the whole "it's my pleasure" throughout the different offices,
Yeah.
throughout the different groups. So, can you talk just real quickly about in the last couple minutes of how sometimes it takes a while, and that's the importance of that messaging, that you've got to continue to stay with it so that people can.
Well, any significant innovation change, particularly when I think it's easier when you're dealing with hard good products like Apple. I think that, quite frankly, is potentially easier because here it is.
Right.
But when you're dealing with innovation that ultimately has to be implemented by people and expressed by people, first of all, you got to have cultural foundation for that. Well, we had that. Secondly, you got to have an operating model that's potential to execute it. Well, we had that. But then you have to deal with all the paradigms that potentially get in the way of doing something. Well, that's not how we've done it, or that's not how the industry does it, or how's that going to make money? You got to deal with all those real issues as you do the innovation and you test. So we went through, Ken, the exact same innovation process we do for all innovation: voice of the customer, ideation, prototype the ideas literally in those buildings where we could bring in customers and operators and create these customer extra mile experiences, get feedback, tweak them. Then we package procedures, brand standards for those service behaviors. We tested those on about 100 stores. Then we took it to a larger store count. We got customer feedback on those store counts. And by the time we did all that, and with that input, tweak the standards, tweak the systems, and tweak the measurement systems. We do measure and roll it out. It was 7 years. But we couldn't roll it out until we proved to operators it worked. And that's part why it took 7 years. It wasn't creating the model or the behaviors. It was doing adequate testing to help the operators understand, hey, this is what it really looks like. This is the kind of talent you've got to attract to be able to execute it. But if you do it well, this is what happens to the brand experience, and this is what happens to your sales. The net is, after almost 2.5 years of testing, we saw the test stores, same store sales were almost double the same store sales of the rest of the chain.
Wow.
And okay, so there was dollar and cents associated to it. It wasn't why we did it. But when you're dealing with the practical reality of an operator who you're asking to staff to a different execution model and invest in it, you got to be able to give them some tangible proof that they're going to at least break even on it. Well, it turned out a lot better than that. So yeah, it took 7 years.
Hey, Steve, you've been fantastic, and I do highly recommend your book. They can also go to your website, srobinson.com, and
that's correct,
find out more about you and more about some of your speaking engagements. Obviously you mentioned kind of the last thing, and I'll give you the last word here. You have come through a lot of crises, been through a lot of difficult moments. Obviously you've had some high points as well. What message would you give business owners and CEOs right now as they're dealing with this crisis in their business and in their life?
That's a great question. Well, if you have purpose, go back to your purpose. And help people filter the crisis and how you respond to the crisis, based upon the roots of your purpose. If you don't have a purpose, a clear purpose, use this crisis to ask the question, okay, why do we exist? Let's get clarity around why we exist. And then let's use the answer to that to help us think through and navigate how we're going to respond to the crisis. I can tell you that in the case of Chick-fil-A, even in this crisis, they did a lot of the same things we did in 1982. They froze hiring. They froze store growth. They didn't fire anybody. They've put all sort of systems in place to help the operators sustain their staffing levels. They can't give them money because they're independent contractors. That would break down the legal barrier between. But they've given them options that allow them to accrue and delay expenses and other things. So they've helped create stability for the operators and their team members. So they've responded in a way that reflects this value around stewardship, including the people of the business, and not just focused on cash flow. Now, trust me, they're focused on cash flow too, but they've made, I think, incredibly wise choices to preserve the value around people, the most important asset of Chick-fil-A. We don't want to lose the skill sets we have in not only the staff, but in the restaurants, and what can we do to help the operators weather that storm? I think those are the kind of decisions you got to make. What or who are the most important assets in the business, and how do we preserve those? What can we delay? What can we eliminate? And what must we preserve to fulfill our purpose when we come out of it?
Hey, Steve, thank you for that. And again, thank you for your book. I love that you put right on the cover, how faith cows and chicken build a brand, and you led it with faith. And I just want to thank you for your faith. I want to thank you for your leadership. You're just an outstanding man of God. And my two favorite words are the words "well done," good, right? And I just want to tell you, well done, Steve.
Well, thank you, Ken. You're very kind.
I appreciate your time today, and I appreciate your work. I look forward.
You're welcome, and it's an honor to be with you and all the guests you had online.
Very, very good. Thank you very much.
I wish you all, but I'll offer a prayer today for all of you as you navigate this.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Hey, we will have another CEO conversation on Monday. We're going to have Barry Wolf, who is an HR expert and has written the Little Black Book of HR. So if you would like to join that as well, you can send me a message or you can register online. Hey, thank you guys for attending today. I greatly appreciate it. And I hope that you have a great Friday. And